some chips along this blade. Not terribly deep. Actual size, looking at them in real life, is all less than 1 millimeter. So I'm not terribly worried about getting super aggressive taking these out. I should be able to take these out, especially with a Chicago cutlery blade like this. Not exactly a super high-end steel. Should be able to take that out with my 300 GET stone. I'll show you that. This stone is the King 300 grit. I've actually just bought another one of these because I really like this stone. Kind of as a general purpose, get it 90% sharp stone. Sometimes I just end with this stone if I'm feeling like leaving a really toothy grit. Usually I go a little finer though at the end to finish up, but you should be able to get basically most of the sharpening done just with this stone, with a fairly low grit stone. I soaked it for a little bit in the sink there, just because it's a little bit of what we call a thirsty stone. It's almost a splash and go. So that's why I still have the water bottle here. So kind of get a good shot where I can see the reflection of the light in the stone. I'll see if I can eventually get some other shots as I'm going along with this, but right now I'm just kind of laying a layer of water along the entire top of the stone so that it's all just kind of sitting there soaking in. All right. Basically, the first thing I'm going to do is look at how wide the bevels are on each side of this knife. So this one, you can see that bright line there, how wide that strip is compared to the strip on this side. And I'm guessing this is probably still the factory sharpening, and those are usually pretty even on most mainstream knives. So I'm not too worried about this one being uneven. If it's been sharpened before, especially by hand sharpening, sometimes they'll end up with a little bit of an uneven bevel. And if I have one side that has a wider bevel and the other side has a narrower bevel, I will start my sharpening on the side that has the narrower bevel usually, just because it's easier to take that narrow bevel wider than it is to take a wide bevel narrower. And I may rethink that as I'm going along here. It's what makes sense in my brain at the moment, but I may change that in a second here. All right, so I'm just going to start with edge toward me, which I guess if I'm just talking about a posture, not necessarily which way I'm using on the stone, I'd call this an edge. Well, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to stroke both ways. I'll show you edge trailing and edge leading strokes have different uses later on. So right now the entire goal of this is to get a burr. So I'm just going to rub along one side of the knife and get a burr. There's a little bit of one sitting here just from the way that the edge of the blade has kind of wrapped over as it's been used and chopped down. There's even more on this side, so everything's just kind of a little buggered up on this blade. So I'll just start on this side just because that's where I'm used to kind of starting. Kind of a good rule of thumb for me, depending on the blade, or a way to help measure the angle after I pick it, is to kind of lay my finger on the top of the blade and then go down until the side of my finger is touching the stone. And I get a sense of how far into the blade I'm sticking my finger, like how far up and down I'm sticking my finger. So if I want a steeper angle, then I'll stick my finger farther down so there's more back behind it, angling it up. If I want a more shallow angle, I'll pull my finger farther up and it'll be really flat. And I never want to go that flat necessarily, but picking the angle then, how do you do that? So I'm just going to start off really gentle, rubbing along, and I'll feel a little bit of, like I said, that burr hanging off the corner that I'll feel grab for a little bit, and I kind of got to ignore that until I do a few strokes. But what I'm gonna eventually feel for is, okay, I feel like I'm sliding along the side of the bevel. If it slides really easily, that probably means the knife is too shallow down and I'm actually riding along that corner between the bevel and the main part of the blade. And if it's kind of grabbing really hard, and you can kind of feel like what part of the blade is grabbing as you move it along. It's hard to portray in a video, but if you hold it up too sharp, you'll kind of feel this edge dig into the stone a bit, and it'll usually do knife or edge leading strokes a bit harder. You'll kind of feel it grab into the stone a little bit. So what I'm going to look for is feeling for the side of that bevel. I kind of feel like it's riding along that, not too flat where it's skating along that corner, not too steep where it's purely going into that edge. But I want to feel like I'm grabbing just a little bit of that edge all the time. You saw those chips right now. Actually, I'll need to start off a little more shallow on this blade because I need to get rid of these chips really before I can do anything else. So actually starting with a chip blade is good because then it can start purposely steep. So I can just wear metal off the edge and you'll get a feel for what it feels like when you're grinding the edge of the blade off, not really lowering a bevel down, but actually taking the edge of the blade off. So again, I'm going to take the chips off. I'm going to try to do it evenly-ish on both sides, but I just need to remove a bit of metal right here and try to do it evenly from heel to tip, so I'm not changing the shape of this edge here this way or anything like that. I don't want to make it flat or too curved or anything like that. So I'm just going to grind some metal down here. Again, really sharp angle. I'm just trying to take metal off from the thinnest part right at the edge. Do it for a while on that side, and then I'm going to do a really, again, super deep angle here and do some on the other side. Back and forth here. Okay, let's see how it looks now. Might not be enough, but let's see what we did. You can see already right there, it's actually really smooth. That looks a lot better. Oh, come back, focus. There we go. Maybe a little bit of a couple chips left up at the top there. Yep, looks like it. So I'll do just a little bit more on the tip, but that was actually enough to knock the chips out. Not too hard on this blade. I'm not pushing hard down to the stone. The thing that's really taking the metal off is the fact that the metal is touching and going across the stone. Pushing down isn't really going to help anything, especially on knife edges, where once it comes to that final V tip, that front edge, think of it more like not quite aluminum foil as far as the thickness and how strong it is, but it's kind of approaching that. It's not a bad mental model to have. That if you're pushing really hard with the knife down into the stone, you're just going to bend that kind of foil, that really thin piece of metal over without actually sharpening it. So what I want to do is just make a lot of like mileage across the stone with the blade. I can do that barely touching it, and I'm still taking off a reasonable little amount of metal. Maybe you want like, I don't know, 5-10 pounds maybe of pressure. Which in a lot of cases is just like the weight of your hands and forearm just kind of sitting down there. I'm not actually pushing with my arms. I'm just kind of resting my forearms down. So it's not very much. Still a little bit there. posture's a little off. I'm standing off to the side of the camera a little bit, trying to stay out of the way. There we go. That's a lot better to me. Yep, okay. So that's gotten rid of the chips there. So any of the chipping is now gone. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hunt for that angle. So I'm gonna try to find where the bevel is and then bring it just a little bit steeper so that that was a huge exaggeration, but a little bit, tiny bit steeper so that I'm actually grinding the very edge of the knife, not just purely working bevels in. If you work just bevels in, imagine this is the profile like this, greatly magnified of an edge of a knife. And this is one bevel and this is the other bevel. If you have a dull blade, those bevels kind of meet in this rounded kind of edge. It doesn't cut very well. And so what you're doing sharpening is you're grinding those kind of rounded bevels first on one side and then on the other side, and eventually those bevels coming together meet and they form a nice sharp edge. If you spend all the time kind of writing here on the bevels, you're gonna take a bunch of metal down and you'll flatten it out more and more, but you'll spend a lot of time working without ever actually acting on this part of the blade right here, that my fingertips, which is actually doing the cutting of the food. And since you're sharpening by hand and not with a guided system here, you're always gonna have some amount of what you call a convex bevel. It's not gonna ever be perfectly flat. Your angle's gonna move around a little bit as you're sharpening. So again, try to write along the bevel, not up here on the shoulder, but don't get so focused on writing only here that you never actually kind of engage this corner into the stone, or you'll spend a lot of time and you're never gonna really feel like you're getting sharp. You'll see kind of the timeline that it takes for me. Some of the things I'm doing with my water here over on the side is just rinsing off the blade, getting off the swarf, that kind of black stuff that comes off. That's actually the steel, and also kind of the mud that works up as the stone wears away. Getting that bevel clean so I can see what I'm doing, and then I'm also putting more water on top of the stone as I do that. It's good to keep your stones a bit clean. You don't want to wash off all the mud, but you can also kind of load up the little spots in the stone that grind the steel. You can load that up with steel, and all of a sudden you'll be grinding along and the stone's not doing much anymore because it's kind of loaded up, so you can have to rinse it out and open up some more spots for the stone to act again. So I'm going to go after the bevels here. So I think I've kind of found where the angle is here. I'm going to put my finger about where it feels right. So in this case, I'm hanging my finger down about that far on the back side. So now I can just put my knife down and the finger down, and I'm kind of holding that angle now. So now I've got a sense in my finger of where the blade is pushing in. You can kind of see that dent in my finger real quick there. And that's kind of about the right angle for me at this particular point. And I'll show you, actually I'll show you it now, a way you can check to see if that is pretty close to the right angle. Get it dry here, because I'm going to show you the Sharpie trick. So I have here just a plain Jane regular fine point Sharpie. Since I'm doing this edge, I want to color this bevel, the one that's down by the stone. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to take the Sharpie and we're just going to color in the bevel all the way up the knife. If you accidentally go farther up the blade than just the bevel, it's not going to hurt you. It comes off really easily with nail polish remover, acetone, something like that. Something like that. Okay, so you can see a couple spots down here. You can see metal showing around the marker. And that's fine. That's going to be kind of what you're going to be looking for in a second here. I'm going to color that in just to make sure it's all the way even here. All right. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to put the knife back on my finger about where I thought it should be. And I'm going to take a few strokes just in a part of the knife. I don't need to do the whole bevel. And see how I'm taking off the Sharpie that's on the bevel right now. Just a few strokes, doesn't take a huge amount. Okay. So now on the bevel here, you can see that I have worn off some of the marker. Up here, the marker still goes all the way down to the bevel, but back here, you can see I've worn some off. There's a bright edge. Kind of hard to see, but honestly, I've taken a bit too steep of an angle. I'm kind of digging down into the stone a little bit too much. I've left too much of my finger showing, basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my guide finger a little bit shallower so that I'm taking the marker off all the way across the width of the bevel. I want to take off the whole bevel at the same time. So kind of putting my finger in a little bit different spot, getting a little bit shallower of an angle here, and we'll see how that works. Yeah, that looks a lot better. So now I'm taking off the entire bevel and not really any more. The extra black you see there is up inside the knife. It's over that shoulder between the bevel and the rest of the knife. And I don't want to take that marker off. I want to leave that there. If my angle had been too flat, I would have taken off that shoulder and maybe even up into the main part of the blade, and I would have left Sharpie close to the actual edge. And that would be an indicator that my angle is too shallow. So now that I've done that, I kind of have a sense of where my finger needs to be here, and I'll test that across the rest of this side and make sure that it holds true for the whole thing. I think I came up a little shallow on there. Back is pretty good. As you can see, I didn't move my finger up toward the tip as I was sharpening there. I was just kind of estimating, so I think I ended up coming up a little bit too steep again. So let me actually move my hand a little farther up the blade, put my finger around at that same guide spot. There we go, it's a lot better. So now I'm taking off practically entire bevel. Maybe could still get a little bit shallower up around the tip. Again, though, my finger had come off the side of the stone as I was doing it, just because I wasn't holding the knife like way up here. So, but now I have a sense. I can kind of get a feel for just looking at the knife and feeling, okay, how angled does it feel like I'm gouging into the stone, cutting into the stone, and how far does this back edge kind of look? How far does it seem like it's away from the stone? This is a good feel gauge. Eventually you kind of get more of a sight gauge of like, well, that just looks really, really flat. That's too flat, and that just looks too steep. And that'll change a little bit for each knife you do. So I'm just gonna finish. Basically, I'm gonna do a minute or so on just this one bevel here. And the goal of this is to, on the bevel, I'm gonna be flattening it out and bringing it in. Eventually, the edge is going to sharpen out on this one side, and I'm going to basically raise a little hook of metal over the top. This hook right here is called the burr. And when I run, here's the side I'm sharpening. When I run my thumb down along this side, I'll be able to feel it grip into my fingerprint a bit. Right now I don't feel much of anything, maybe a tiny bit back here, but especially in a 300 grit stone, you should be able to raise a burr. That's very easy to feel. So that's what I'm gonna go for. I'm gonna go for feeling a burr all the way up the edge. If you have a spot where there's not a burr, that means you need to keep going down on in this bevel. Again, just kind of get mileage across the stone. I'm not putting tons of pressure down into it. I'm just trying to get the steel to travel like as many feet or inches or miles across the stone as efficiently as I can. Not too much of a burr yet. I have actually worn off all the Sharpie that I'd like to wear off though, so at least I'm holding the right angle here. I'm not getting too shallow and wearing off more than I want to. Let's go another minute here. Working up to the tip and then doing the actual tip just takes a bit of experience. Use a lot of Sharpie so you can get a sense for if you're raising your arm up too much and making kind of a weird flat spot up on the bevel up around the tip, or if you're getting too shallow. A lot of people go too shallow and the bevel around the tip gets really like wide. That's not a terribly good thing to have. Okay, so now I'm feeling a bevel. I'm not gonna go for a really hard bevel all the way across. I just want some bevel. I could maybe take a little bit more down by the heel here. There we go. And I'll tell you why I don't want to go for a huge, like, completely unambiguous bevel all the way right now. So if I start off with a knife that's got some dullness and some rounded bevels, and I go for a really hard burr, what that means is I've basically taken one bevel and I've ground it down flat, hopefully, and then I keep bringing it farther and farther and farther and farther in until I get a really good burr that I can feel. Problem is though, is that I've then taken a knife that was fairly even. This side is about the same width and dimensions as this side, and I've basically pushed it way into the knife. And so I've basically moved the tip of the knife from centered to kind of off-centered because I've ground off so much on just the one side getting a bevel first. So sometimes if I'm working a long time on getting a burr and I'm not getting there, I'll actually flip the knife over and work on the other side without a bevel so that I can kind of bring the other bevel in and make sure that the knife edge stays centered along the width of the blade. That's called indexing. I don't want the index of the blade to get off center. I want to keep the knife edge right in the middle. Exceptions apply. There's some single bevel knives out there that you do not want a centered edge, but that's for a completely different advanced kind of lesson. I don't think most people own that kind of knife, and if they do, they are either having a very specialized sharpener do those, or they know exactly what to do themselves. So I've got a reasonable burr. I can kind of feel as I'm running down here. All the way across. It's not really something you can see without a microscope, so I'm not going to try to do that. I'll do the Sharpie trick on this side too, just to show you that. Keep it dry so I don't mess up the marker here. Don't use markers you love because that burr kind of does cut into the marker a little bit here. You can kind of hear it. Okay. So lots of Sharpie there, lots of extra, should be able to see fairly easily. For me personally, I find that when I do a knife on this side and I get an angle that's right, once I go to this side, as much as I try to make it feel even, I always end up going steeper. Unless I pay very careful attention, especially use the Sharpie trick. I usually have to kind of bias myself to go a little flatter than I think to keep it even. So should be okay with using the Sharpie Trick. I should be able to catch any mistake I'm doing pretty close off the bat. Rub some of the swarf off the side here. You can kind of see the blackish gray water around the side of the cutting board now that's coming off from that swarf. All right, here we go. Again, the first few strokes, I've raised a burr, and so you're gonna kind of feel it grab that really fragile burr the first few strokes. Just kind of ignore that, and you'll get a sense for what a good angle is, but get what you think is a good angle, wear off as much as you need to see the Sharpie tricks start to work, and see if that actually worked here. So looking at this, come on, there we go. Looks like that is just the right angle. I'm taking off the marker all the way across the bevel here. There we go. And not really any more, which is exactly what I want. I want to make sure there's no marker left at the very, very edge, which would mean that my knife angle is too shallow. And I want to make sure that I'm taking off the entire width of bevel of marker, or that would mean that my knife angle is too steep and I'm not grinding far enough back up toward the spine. So I'll go all the way up the blade with that. Looks pretty good. It looks like I'm getting a little steep again up at the around the tip, getting really steep there. There's a lot of marker left along the bevel. You can see there's a decently wide silver stripe down here, and then it kind of goes away and turns into a lot of marker stripe up there. So I need to get more shallow around the tip. Again, that's that bias I have of I end up going too steep when I'm doing the edge away from me like this. There we go. So that looks a lot better. You can see the bevel all the way up. And that's what I'll try to keep that angle then, and then I'll try to raise, since I'm sharpening on this side, the burr is gonna come up this way, so I'll feel the burr on this side. I'm already starting to feel just a little bit of one, so that's good progress already. Exactly what stroke you use, a lot of times instead of, well, I change around. Sometimes I go kind of perfectly 90 degrees to the stone. Other times I angle the knife and I'm kind of doing like a 45-degree thing. It's all in the technique, what feels comfortable to you. If you're more concerned about angle, sometimes it's easier to think about if you keep it straight 90 degrees. Once you're comfortable with that angle, as long as that distance between the spine and the stone stays the same, the angle's the same here, even though you're going 45 degrees against the stone. So it's all up to you. Usually, at some point, it's good to make kind of more contact across the whole stone as you can. Just becomes a little bit more efficient because, again, it's about the mileage of steel across the stone. That actually is the progress. Good burr up around here. Not so much around the heel yet. And be careful if you do too much work all in one section of the blade, you just go and you go and you go and you go. A lot of times, just due to the fact that you can't hold a perfectly even angle all the time by doing this by hand, you look at the bevel later and like one spot will shine when you angle the knife like this, and the next spot will shine when you angle the knife like this. So toward the end of any, like I'm done with this stone on this side, do a lot of full blade strokes to even that out so it looks nice too. One of the hardest things for beginners at this stage is not rocking the knife up onto the corner of the stone, either this way or that way. You want to touch across the flatness of the stone the whole way. If you don't do that and you're right up along a corner, you'll kind of grind a lot in right where that corner was touching, and then you'll have a goofy spot on that bevel that you have to work out depending on how picky you get. That's just something that takes a lot of practice, and I'll show you a trick for that later. So now I've got a good burr all the way across. Now that I've got a burr on both sides, the job is removing the burr. If I leave that kind of dangly, grippy foil edge, eventually what will happen is that the burr will kind of like wrap itself around the tip of the blade, and you'll just kind of have this mess of bent over steel where your nice, clean, sharp edge should be. So you need to remove that burr after you get it. And I've seen some people that talk about taking a burr off with pure edge trailing strokes. Basically, if the edge is here and I'm pushing the spine first with the edge in the back, this is called an edge trailing stroke. If I go this way, this is an edge leading stroke. Some people advocate for edge leading strokes. Some people advocate for edge trailing strokes for taking the burr off, or what's called stropping. I've switched to edge leading as my preferred way of taking burrs off. Maybe it's just a mental thing, but it seems like for knives that are kind of general purpose, not super high-end, say super hard Japanese steels or something like that, it seems like pushing the burr kind of back harder kind of helps kind of snap it off and wear it off faster, as opposed to edge trailing where I'm kind of pulling that foil straight, but I'm not really taking it off. I need to take it off, or it'll eventually just kind of wrap itself back around the edge of the blade and ruin what the sharpness feel that you get there. So I'm going to do edge leading strokes. These are even lighter pressure than before. These are basically just like the weight of the blade. Again, that edge is really, it's not that fragile, but think of aluminum foil. It's not strong, so if you push down, you're just going to bend the burr up without actually taking it off. I want to grind that burr off against the stone. So again, mileage of steel against a stone. If it's not making contact, or if I'm just doing these little motions like this, that's not really mileage against the stone, that's just pressure. I need mileage. I'm going to slide it really gently across, and you'll kind of feel a bunch of kind of garbly, almost like pebbles between the blade and the stone. Sometimes that's bits in the stone, but a lot of times that's just actually the burr kind of wearing off and kind of coming off unevenly, which is fine. I'm going to do maybe 5 or 10 strokes, something like that. So some of the burr is wearing off and some of it's just bending over. So at some point this becomes futile to stay on one side. So as I do this, I can feel it getting a lot smoother already. And again, this is where you want to make sure you're not going too shallow. You're never going to actually engage the burr against the stone. You'll just be engaging the shoulder of your bevel. So you need to maybe go whatever angle you were using for your bevel, go like 1 degree steeper, and then you can actually engage the burr. I'm just kind of feeling right now, trying to feel if that the grind of the edge against the stone feels the same all the way up the blade. Feels clean and feels even all the way up. Feeling a little smooth, maybe feeling a little bit left over here. There we go. Again, I am using like almost no pressure. I'm just using my hands to hold it flat against the stone and not riding up on a corner. Get a little more water on the stone here. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the first side again. Again, I've ground some of it off, mileage against the stone, and I've actually probably, even as light as I'm going, still bent some of it. So I need to get back to the side I bent it to and see if I can grind that off before it bends to the other side. Again, super light pressure. Basically, sharpening a knife is 2 steps. Make a burr, take the burr off. Now I'm just kind of alternating back and forth because I figure I've taken 80–90% of the burr off, and I'm just trying to get those last bits. And whatever weakened pieces are there, actually grind them off and not just keep folding them back and forth over. So again, this is a 300 grit stone. A lot of beginners think, oh, I need to get a 1,000 or 10,000 grit stone to actually get my knife sharp. That is untrue. You will get different kinds of sharpness, but honestly, if I were to give you a knife sharpened with a 300 grit stone versus a knife that I took all the way up to 10,000 and I let you cut tomatoes and regular stuff around the kitchen for a while, you probably like the knife that I sharpened with just the 300 grit stone a little bit better. Like the microscopic level, there's actually like little teeth that each stone leaves, and the 300 grit stone is going to leave kind of bigger teeth than a 10,000 grit stone. And those little teeth kind of act like mini serrations to really cut into the skins of tomatoes a lot more easily than if you have a super polished edge, which is going to kind of glide over. Polished edges are great for what's called push cuts, where you're not really sliding the knife along what you're cutting, you're just pushing straight down into it. But most people end up using some amount of sawing kind of motion when they cut, which is perfectly fine, perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with that. All right, so I'm just kind of dragging my finger print across the blade. And this is one of the ways I just kind of do a sanity check on how sharp it actually feels. It feels fairly good. I'm going to do a little bit more work on removing the burr. I'll show you a couple more tricks I have. One of the main tricks people use is a thing called a strop. Now, this strop has 2 sides on it. It has a side with rough leather and then a side with smooth leather. And I think this strop either came with, or I ended up buying a stick of, I'm not even sure what they call it, it's just stropping compound. And you can kind of see a little bit green color here is what color it was. And then as you use it, it loads up with steel and kind of turns this black color. Try not to get your strops wet, so make sure your blades are dry when you strop. But basically, doing edge trailing strokes only. You don't want to do edge leading against leather. You'll chop your leather up. But using the leather and the knife, and in this case, instead of going more steep to engage the edge, I'm actually going to go flatter, because the edge of the knife will press down into the leather, and if you go steep with any kind of pressure, you'll actually kind of bend your edge over and make it feel unsharp again. So I'm going to go shallower than I normally would. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of drag the knife, edge trailing only, along the strop, and kind of pull off any loose bits of that burr that may still be dangling around. Again, 2 steps: make a burr, remove the burr. You do either of those wrong, you're not going to really make any progress. And that's where a lot of beginners get frustrated. They do one or the other of those badly. Usually they don't remove the burr very well. So it's worth taking a lot of time to remove the burr. So stropping on leather is one of the most popular ways. One of the other ways, especially if I'm using a really soft steel, and I think I've made a really hefty burr, that as much as I try to take it off on the stone might not be coming off. Another way I can take it off is with a cork. And the way I use the cork is then I just barely set the knife into the cork and I just drag it along. I'm going to drag it along just underneath this like little registered logo here, and I'll see if we can see anything here. I'm just barely touching the cork. You can see right under that R now there's a little black line. That's a bit of steel that's come off, wearing off into the cork. The cork is super soft, so it's not really going to dull your blade, but it will tear off any remaining bits of that burr. So now I should be pretty much burr free. What I like to do after that though is still do a few more stropping passes on the stone to get that edge, whatever may have kind of torn off of that burr and left an actual not sharp part of the edge. Just kind of do what I can a little bit here to actually sharpen that back to a crisp edge. I'm not trying to make a burr here. This is just stropping. All right. Moment of truth. Let's figure out if I know what I'm talking about. Watch this be the time it doesn't work. Let me go get a piece of paper. Be right back. All right. Plain old printer paper here. Let's see if I can cut it nice and smoothly. What I'm looking for here is that it doesn't hang up as I pull, and it feels like it's the same ease of cutting all the way through, and that actually does cut. There's one little hang up right around here. Let me see if it does it again. No, I don't think it did. Maybe just a technique thing. Sometimes things just grab a little weird. So I've gotten this knife pretty sharp just with a 300 grit stone. I'm gonna try the paper towel test. Paper towel is even harder to cut than paper. So there's like a slow stroke you can do through this and a fast stroke. I'm just gonna do a slow one right now, just so don't get too crazy and knock my camera over. There we go. I'm cutting down through that paper towel pretty easily. Let me try a fast stroke here. Hopefully I don't knock stuff down. Oops, tore it. So, yeah. Try it one more time. Yeah, that didn't work so well. So a really, really sharpened knife will do that very cleanly, not tear the paper towel. But this one is, that's one of the things that a 10,000 grit stone will actually do a little bit better than a 300 grit stone. So, but cutting like that, that's a nice clean cut. With a 300 grit stone means we've done a pretty good job here. So 300 grit's nice, but the teeth it leaves are a little bit big. And again, these are like microscopic level teeth. So while they cut really nice right now, they're actually not terribly durable because they are very small little teeth. So there actually is benefit, I think, to taking it up to a bit higher of a grit. And that's where I like right now 800 grit. Which is what this stone is here. This is a, focus here, Naniwa Pro 800 grit stone. So you can see Naniwa there, P800 I believe stands for Pro 800. This is about the thickness it was when it came, and I've used this for quite a long time. It's very long lasting stone. This one is basically a pure splash and go stone. I don't have to soak it first. Stones like that you honestly don't want to soak because you can kind of make the binding that's actually holding the stone together kind of fall apart a little bit, and you'll have a stone that kind of cracks and falls apart. With the king stone that's in the sink, I don't mind as much because that's a fairly inexpensive stone. I think that's like 27 bucks or something like that, maybe 30. This stone was more like 60 to $80, something like that. But the actual cutting compound is hard enough that basically any knife I ever get, even if it's a really special steel, this stone will be able to actually sharpen it. Sometimes that king stone is a little bit too soft and it doesn't actually do much against really hard steels. It's just not, the stone itself isn't hard enough to affect the steel as much. So I'm gonna keep in mind those same angles as I had before and basically do the same thing. Make a burr, take off a burr. long strokes all the way up and down the blade on either side you do. And you'll do more of those when you're stropping, but it's good not to let it get out of hand right now too. As you get in higher grits, the burr becomes less and less noticeable. 800 should still be pretty noticeable, but once you get it to something like I have a 3000 stone, and I've noticed that the burrs on that stone are very hard to feel. They're just so fine. Because basically you're kind of feeling those little micro serrations, those teeth. A little messier than that, but the amount of metal that actually gets pulled over by the grit of the stone is a lot smaller of a dimension. There we go. Just a little grip right here and down here, missing a little bit in the middle and missing a bit up at the tip. Again, just mileage over the stone. There we go. Burr all the way down. Do just a little bit more on the tip. As you get more experienced, tips are often one of those places that get ignored. People do a lot of good work in the middle of the blade, but ignore the heels and the tips a bit. So don't ignore the tips. You do a surprising amount of work with those. Looks a lot more even too. All right, so now I'm gonna do the hard part here that I have the phone on the stand here for. I'm going to show you a concept that really made the jump for me, going from a kind of beginner to more, I guess, professional. I hate using that word, but knife sharpener, of actually getting a good result all the time versus not. One of the things that's hard to really tell is if you're actually sharpening the whole part of the blade. This is a bit of a flatter profile knife, but some knives, maybe like this one here, which has a very rounded corner, it's hard to tell if I'm actually touching or if I'm actually sharpening that whole bevel all the way around that curve and not kind of skipping parts in the middle as I do an imperfect like wrist hinge as I'm going along. So the thing that I found that's the most helpful is this concept of kind of peeling water off the stone. I'm going to try to get a better angle here on my camera. There we go. I'm going to make sure that it's got a good layer of water, and it's very helpful to have a light directly above where you are. I'm basically centered under this light right now. So now I need to do this side of the knife, and what I'm gonna hopefully be able to show you in this camera view is as I'm going along, you can see I've peeled the water off the stone. That shows that I've actually pulled the knife perfectly flat along the stone and that the edge is actually making contact all the way across. If I'm riding up along the corner, I've pulled water off over here, but not over here. I'll show you that again. You can see I pulled it just along that edge. That means I'm raising my hand too high and I'm riding too far along this edge of the stone. If my hand is too low, I didn't even remove a strip of water there. There you go. I removed a bunch up here, but not much over here. So that's kind of a good gross metric, is my hand too high or too low. But the fine metric to see if I'm actually getting the entire bevel of the blade is as I'm pulling the knife down, I basically want to leave a strip of water that I've peeled off the stone, ideally in the middle of the stone or somewhere on the stone where you're actually trying to touch. It's better to make sure you try to use different parts of your stone so you don't just wear out this favorite section, this like little strip right in the middle of the stone that gets most worn. as you get better, you can pick where you're touching the stone a bit more. But basically, I want to see a trail of peeled water come off the entire edge of the blade as I'm working. Right now, there's a lot of water here, and this is a fairly flat blade, but you can see up here, there's a bit of a strip. So that means the knife or the stone is sharpening right there. It's not actually touching over here or over here though. You can see those strips there. Those are the only spots the knife is actually touching the stone. So if as I'm going up and down the blade here, I notice that one part of the blade never really peels the water off the stone, that means the bevel on this side is actually a bit higher right here and higher right here and low right here. So the stone, which should be perfectly flat, is never actually touching there. And you're never gonna raise a burr there because the knife isn't actually touching the stone there. So peeling the water, I think, is one of the most useful things to see as you're sharpening a knife. So you can see I'm working up on the tip right now. And I'm gonna try to gently lower my hand so that I'm touching a different part of the blade. I'm gonna try to gradually go all the way down the blade and hopefully be able to see if I start skipping somewhere on that edge. A little bit too much water maybe. If you have too much water, you can't quite see it. If you have too little water, you can't see it either. So it's a matter of having a good amount of water on the stone. So right now I'm working up on the tip. There you go. Now I'm starting to pull a little bit down and they kind of skip from like here to there. I'm not really touching in the middle there very well. I'm trying to gradually lower my hand. Oh, there we go. Now I'm in that little dead area. Right there where I was trying to get. Now I'm gonna go a little bit lower and go farther down toward the middle of the blade. There we go. There we go. So now you can see I'm wearing off over here, but I'm not touching here. Getting a little dangerously close to the edge of the stone. So I need to lower my hand and get the edge flat against the stone. There we go. Now I'm peeling water all the way across the stone. Now here's another thing that happens. Again, I mentioned heels are sometimes trouble for beginners. Even though I feel like I'm pretty flat, I'm only peeling the water on this side. The heel is not actually peeling the water all the way down to the stone. See that? So that means the heel is actually not getting worked on right now. I'm not raising a bevel or a burr on this side, so I need to purposely even like feel like I'm raising the tip off the stone a little bit to get down to the heel, or just spend extra time grinding here until the bevel's flat enough to where any high spots here are gone and I'm actually touching that side of the heel. Depends how curved your blade is. So now I'm actually getting down to the corner. See that? Now, if I have a chip left in my blade or some goofiness left with the bevel, you can actually see as I'm peeling the water like this, it's gonna leave, instead of a nice strip peel all the way across the stone, it'll leave like a line of water kind of down the middle. And that'll be like if there's a chip somewhere in the blade and the water's actually kind of leaking through instead of pulling it. It's always good to make sure you're doing a few strokes before you think, oh no, I've got a chip, because sometimes it could just be like a blob of mud or something from the stone that's kind of left behind. But if it happens over and over and over and over, and you're still leaving a line of water, that probably means you've actually got an imperfection in the bevel on that blade that you need to keep working on. Oops. Get the reflection back centered here. So I've worked on it a little bit now. And lo and behold, I've actually gotten a burr in all that time. So now again, I'm gonna do the edge leading stropping strokes. And now that I've gotten a burr, take the burr off. Kind of see see water peeling as I do edge leading strokes too. It's hard because like the peel is underneath the blade here, so sometimes it fills back in before you can quite see it. I'm working with my arms around both sides of a tripod right now. It's a little awkward. Okay, that feels pretty smooth. I feel like the burr is gone. maybe a touch left, but I'm going to do some more strokes on either side, so I'm not going to worry completely about that. I'll switch to the other side. Again, edge leading. The first few strokes I always feel like you're grabbing a bit too hard in the stone just because it's that burr that's grabbing into the stone, not the actual edge that you want to consider. There we go, now it's smoothed out. Flip it over. How many times do you do this? Depends on what you're feeling. If you're a beginner, you're not going to feel much, so I would overdo removing your burr than underdo it. Just because if you underdo your burr removal, you're going to end up having a knife that feels dull really fast. There we go. Getting a feel for kind of how each side feels, and I want each side to feel the same. And this is also the time to do lots of full bevel heel to tip strokes to get the bevel looking the same shininess, the same angle all the way across. Okay, so I've basically taken off the bevel here. I'll do a swipe on my cork just to show that again. Just really, really light. Do a couple. Okay, I'll do a few more strokes just in case I've torn off a little bit of metal on the edge and left a actually not sharp spot. I'll see if I can get it just a little sharp. Again, though, I'm not trying to raise a burr. I'm just doing more refining strokes. Remember how I, toward the beginning, I was talking about sometimes it's actually good to bias slightly a bit steeper into the blade, and this is one of those times when you're doing these light stropping strokes at the end, especially, you're not going to be removing that much metal. You don't have to be too scared. But in order to get more of the burr off, getting the burr off is very important. Sometimes it's good to do what I call, or what a lot of people call a micro-bevel. So if I've got the geometry of the blade like this now, everything is nice and flat on both sides, the edge is centered down the middle of the blade, not off to one side. A micro-bevel, if I could bend my fingertips that sharply, would be like I have this angle along the side of the bevel, but then just toward the very tip of the blade, or tip of the edge, I'm actually going to do a slightly steeper angle. I'm going to bring it in just a little steeper like that. And that just helps strengthen the very edge of the blade. Again, this is very thin metal at the edge, and if you go through something hard or hit into a hard cutting surface, you can kind of bend that over a little bit easily. So something like a micro-bevel, one, can help strengthen that because then it's a little bit like thicker, and two, as you form the micro-bevel, you're actually going to take off burr as well. Again, these are super light strokes. Whatever angle I was using before, I'm going to bring it up just a few more degrees, not very much, and just do a few light strokes lightly down each side. And this may not be how everybody does a micro-bevel. There's some people that make this into a science. This is more how I do it. So I'm just going to do 3 strokes there. The other side, kind of take the angle I was doing, raise it up just a little, and go all the way up the edge. That should be good. I'll do one more. There we go. And I'm going to call that done. After this, I would wash the blade off, make sure any gook is off, get some acetone, get all the extra Sharpie off. But that's basically how I sharpen a knife. So I hope that's helpful.